All right, so we have our CSV data here with a few entries. Notice the headers and then the data records here. So we're just going to use this data and use that inside of our application. So the first thing I'm going to do, I have this friday.py file. I'm going to add some logic to read and write CSV files. So if this is my runner, maybe I want to create a separate file that handles the data for me. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call that modules. Again, you can call that whatever you think is appropriate. In there, I'm going to add, let's just say users. Let's pretend this is some application that has users. User.py. Here, I'm going to create a class, and right now I'm just going to stub it out. So when I say stub it out, I'm just going to not add any logic to it. So it's going to be class user and simply pass. So this is called a stubbed class. You could have stub functions. So if you know there's functionality you want to add eventually, it's kind of good to have those placeholders. So in this case, I'm going to have a user class that's going to obviously just do something. For now, I'm going to use my runner file, which is friday.py, and from modules.user, make sure I have access to that class I just created. And then my runner file. So yeah, let's go back to my user, yes. Here, I want to maybe have some logic that could read and write that user data. So this is where I'll create a class method. Again, class methods, make sure everyone's clear on it. Class methods don't act upon a unique individual instance. It's just a general logic for this user concept. So it's usually good to just have these methods nested within that class because it's dealing with creating those objects and writing it out to a file. You don't have to add it as a class method. You kind of create a standalone method if you think that's more appropriate. But in this case, I'm going to create a class method. We use the CLS name instead of self for class methods. Again, this is, sorry, I should name this properly. So this is, let's say, read data.
I know you probably just said this, and I'm sure you've gone over this a lot of times, but can you just in one more time go over like why would we want to use a class method versus a not class method?
Actually, great question. Happy to go over that. So I'm gonna I'm gonna write this in comments. So we have instance methods, we have class methods, and then I'm just gonna add this. I don't want to confuse you guys. There's also static methods that you might see those. So instance methods, these are particular to each instance. I guess the differentiating factor, or you create these when you're, sorry, I'm typing and trying to talk at the same time. When you want to interact upon instance attributes, that's when you have instance methods. So let's just quickly create my init method, because I know I'm going to want to do that eventually. This is going to take in a name and favorite food. Okay, so anytime you want to act upon instance data, you usually want an instance method. So if I have self.name equals name and self dot, let's get my columns there, favorite food equals favorite food. All right, so now I have some instance attributes. If I want to do something with these, that's when I would create an instance method. So for example, if I want to update my name, like let's say, a person wants to change their name after they create it, that's when I would create an instance method. So let's actually create one. I'm not sure if we're going to use it, but let's say update name. This is maybe not the greatest example because it's going to be a pretty simple function that just takes in a name and name parameter. So this will be new name or whatever I want to call it, and we'll assign it. The reason you want to create, again, this is just a very simple concept for a more general, simple example for a general concept. Anytime you're dealing with instance methods, you generally want to have a method that can do it for you. And this is the idea of, again, abstraction and encapsulation. You usually shouldn't be updating these instance attributes outside of this class. So what I mean by that, if I go to my runner file and create a user instance, let's say I'll create one called James, just because James is asking the question. And James will have a username or have a name. So James White. And I think he said sushi. So we'll just use that strings for now. So, yep. So that's a James instance. And now if I want to actually update his name, you can, this totally will work. I could do James.name equal, let's say he wants to go by Jake White, right? So I can do this. This is going to update the value on this James instance, but usually it's bad practice too. Usually you want to only have methods that interact upon this data, because this is an instance attribute. So it's better, just from a design perspective, to have a method that's called update name, and then I could pass in Jake White here. Again, the reason being is because this update name might be doing something else. Like there might be some other requirements or something else that relies on the name, right? So like theoretically, just kind of, again, making things up here. Let's say we have a username also, but that's internal. And the username is going to be self.name plus at code. All right, let's say username is that, or maybe email to make it a little more lookable. So yeah, let's say we auto-generate emails for all of our students. That's going to just be the name, maybe without the space, so let's ignore that. But it's going to be a name plus something we tack on. If we were accessing the name this way, well, the name is going to get updated, but our logic over here, where did it go? Let's do this. Let's keep it how it is. Let's say this is what we want to do. So anytime that the name changes, we need to update the email, because that's just how we have designed our system. So that's the whole point that I'm trying to expose here. If you directly are updating instance attributes, you can kind of screw up what the class is intending to do. In this case, our class in this example is trying to keep an email synced to the name. But we don't want the users to be able to set the email, because we have a strict criteria where emails had to match username at Platoon. We don't want to give that ability to our users. So again, usually want to create instance methods whenever you need to either read or write to instance attributes. So those are instance methods. Class methods, on the other hand, don't interact directly on instance attributes. All right, so if you're messing with individual properties like James, if I need to update James' names, I'm not James's name, I'm not going to create a class method for it. That's particular to a particular instance. Versus a class method, that's something if you need to change something for an entire class, or just want to work on something that is related to the class but not related to a particular instance. So in this case, I'll just stick with my example. If I want to read like user data, that's going to create maybe user objects for me. That is not particular to an instance. This is just a general functionality that I'm kind of just having in this user class, because it makes sense for me organizationally to have something that's really related to users to be in this user class. Again, that's a design choice. You guys can definitely do something else, but just make sure you can justify why you decided to either create a method somewhere else, or just do whatever design decisions you make. Again, you should be able to back them up with justifications.
Just to clarify on that point you just made, so class methods are kind of like independent functions that are going to be doing something that's not even related to the instance, but then you're kind of placing them within a class because it maybe makes sense to be there without it actually necessarily needing like parameters being input.
Yep, so that second part is a little more subjective. You may not want to have these class methods in here. You could totally have them as standalone methods if that makes more sense to you. Static methods, I don't know if I want to go into this, but just give a full picture. Class methods don't interact with directly, typing poorly, on instance attributes, but they work with class attributes. So let's say users had like, let's say prefix for email. And right now it's at Platoon. So I'll use that, where was it, right here? Right, so this prefix for email is a class attribute. Let's say I need to update that. You're not going to update that for one particular instance necessarily. Again, you can override it with a D, as I said, if you need to special case it. But let's say, Platoon changes and they say, we're now .net instead of a .org, right? So initially I might have it as .org. Now, if this needs to be modified, like on the fly, like let's say we have like a website where we can make changes to our backend data. Well, then we're going to need a method that's, at class method So that's this decorator means it's going to be a class method, not an instance method. And let's just say update email prefix class. So now we want to do something that's on a class level attribute. That's where a class method makes sense. So in here, let's do self.email prefix. I guess this is a postfix or suffix. Bad with my naming here. And we'll just say this is, whatever we want it to be. All right, so again, class methods are for when you're interacting on class attributes or just doing something general with that class. Like I want to use a CLS attribute. Static methods are different. Just to give you a full picture, I know we're not going to be using them too much. Static methods, there's a decorator for that. This is something where you're not interacting with anything about the class. You just have something that's, again, it could totally be a standalone function. This is where it might make sense to just have this somewhere else. But if I have just something like do something, this takes in no parameters. So it doesn't take in a class, it doesn't take in a instance attribute or instance variable. Like there's no self, there's no class. And this will just like, I'm not trying to think what this can do, but this might be just like print users, say code is awesome. Again, this doesn't have anything to do with users, so it's not a great example, but if this were somewhere related where we want to say there are users in our application, I don't know. So this do something might be something that's tangentially related to user, and you might want to just nest it in here. Again, static methods could definitely be standalone methods, as in I could make a function outside of here that's just doing the same thing. So static methods, again, we don't use them too much. We don't talk about them too much, but there's a distinction between using static methods and class methods. For now, we're just going to focus on instance methods. When you want to do something on a particular instance, that's when you create instance methods. When you want to do something more general, as in that applies to maybe multiple instances or the class level attributes, that's when a class method makes sense. Did that add any clarity, James, or did that kind of talk in circles?
Excuse me. Can you undo that back? Because when you reference the postfix, there is underline on the self. I think it's saying it's not defined or something on the self, where it says self.postfix. I think it's saying it's not defined.
Thank you. That is my fault. CLS here, because CLS is referring to this class versus when you have self is referring to the instance you created. So make sure everyone gets that. So I created a James instance. So when I call James.update name, this self value on that method is going to be the James instance, because that's the instance that's calling this method. So that's how self gets populated. Whichever instance is calling your method, that is what a self is referring to. So in this case, I can imagine that self is James in this case. So James.name is going to be some value. James.email is going to be some value. That's what self is doing. CLS, again, in class methods, that's referring to the class itself. So the concept, not an instance. So this is the concept of user. I want to update the postfix for email that we use for it. So thank you for Musa for pointing that out. This shouldn't be self.
That's right. So the CLX is gonna change the original postfix, or it's gonna be like its own variable. It is gonna update it.
It is gonna change the original postfix for email value. It's gonna overwrite it with a T. So yeah, this actually modifies this value. It's not masking it or like creating a new value for it. But if I can kind of get back to our original goal, which was working with CSV files. So if I want to read user data, I'm going to create a class method. Let's go through the motions. So the first thing I want to do is import CSV. Maybe I'll go, let's quickly do it 3 ways. So I know there's confusion on maybe what the CSV module is doing. So I want to read that data file that I created in data, that's stuff.csv. So let's go with that. So let's go with open. I want to open a file, and I always struggle with this part. How do I find that file? Friday's gonna be running this, so let's go /data slash stuff .csv. Sorry, I'm going to take an extra minute here. How to read a file, os.path. I always use relative path. It's better to use absolute path. So I want to make sure that I'm doing the proper way rather than give you bad examples.
Is the reason we use absolute path so that it will work in any, like, no matter where it's put in somebody else's computer?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, well, I mean, if you have relative paths, it'll also work, but if that file moves, as in like if your source file moves, then the path should still be able to find it. So I do os.path.join. All right, I definitely need to read up on that. So apologies, I'm just gonna go with my relative paths just so it's working. So with open as data file. So this is a relative path. Again, you should be using the os.join just for more security, but this will work. So as data file, and then we want to read contents out of this. So without using the CSV module, which I've not imported, you can still read a file and get all the contents out of it. So in this case, I might do for line in data file, read lines, right? So this data file is some file object that we created that has a method called read lines on it. So it's going to go one by one through our file and read lines. So if I print out each line just to see what we're getting. All right, so we have read user data. From my runner file, I'm going to call user. Again, this is the class. I'm not calling it on an instance because we have a class method, user.read user data. All right, this takes in no parameters, if I remember correctly. This class method takes in a magical parameter class that's automatically passed to it, so I don't have to do it. And then all this is doing is going to open a file, read each line, and print it out to console for now. So let me give this a quick run. Do Python Friday.5. All right, there we go. So we noticed we got output. This looks like what my CSV file had, right? We had 3 entries. We also had a header. So the header got printed out as part of that. So again, you don't need the CSV module to read text files or any type of file. You could read it as a text file and nothing's going to go wrong. The reason we use the CSV module is so that it kind of handles these commas for us, because that's what the data is actually representing. So this is basically what a spreadsheet will look like. If you go to Google Sheets and create columns of ID, name, favorite food, add entries, this can be boiled down to a comma separated file. So that's why CSVs exist, and that's why they're common formats. So going back to my read data, I'm using just the baked in read lines method for this file type. But again, the reason we choose to use the CSV module is because it makes our lives easier. We don't have to. So just kind of going back on this, if I wanted to, I think I did this earlier, I can create, let's just say data list equals line.split, and this will be split on commas, right? Because I know that it's a comma separated file. So the commas are separating values for us. So if I did this, I should be able to get individual records that way. So I run my Friday again. Notice I get an array or a list, and each item is broken down into a separate index. So I could access the name directly. I don't need to do any more processing. The only processing I had to do was split the line on commas. So this is all manual. I'm not using the CSV module. The CSV module just makes it slightly easier. So I imported CSV, that module. So instead of doing read lines here, I can add like a read data, set that equal to CSV dot reader, and pass it the file. So this is essentially going to do the same thing that I'm doing here, but instead of me having to split it myself, this read data object I created from CSV reader will do it for me. So what's going on here is we're calling reader on the CSV module. That passes back an object for us that can be used to iterate over. So in this case, line, if I print out line. So again, csv.reader is a function that's going to take in a data file and basically parse it for us. So it's going to break it down so that we can get those individual components without having to split it ourselves. So I run this. Notice I get the same basic output. I get everything divided up into a list. So again, the CSV module takes care of that for me. It's a small benefit, as in makes it slightly easier, but that's the whole reason we use the CSV reader. I think I had an extra line in here, so yeah, that's why we've got an empty array down here. Okay, so the last thing I want to get into, because this is very useful also, another thing that the CSV reader provides for us, that is dictionary reader. So this is very handy for when you want to create user objects, which I'm going to want to do in this example. So I'm going to use dict reader, pass it a data file, and that's going to give me an object. In this case, it's going to be a dict reader object. So in that case, if I print out my line now, let's see what we get. And I think, yeah, let me see what happens here. Okay, so now we get a dictionary. So again, hopefully everyone at this point understands the difference between a list and a dictionary. A list is just an ordered an ordered container of values, versus a dictionary has key value pairs. So my header was translated into the keys. So I have ID for each record, and then the ID value for that record. Same thing with name, same thing with favorite food. The reason why dictionary reader is really useful, again, this is another benefit of using the CSV module. Again, you could totally do this yourself. It's just gonna be a lot more work to create the same output here in a dictionary. The reason we want a dictionary in this case is because we can use the advantage of quargs in Python. So quargs is a funny sounding name, but the whole magic there is if I want to create an instance, let's just say a user of type user, and then user takes in two parameters, name and favorite food. So I can, if again, hypothetically, just hopefully you guys can stick with me. If I wanted to create my own user here, let's just say Tom Preet, and I don't know Tom's favorite food. Tom, do you have a favorite food?
Mastacholi.
I can't spell that, so I will Mastacholi. I'm way off here. Yeah,
that's fine.
It's close enough. Hopefully, I'll have to spell check later. But yeah, so if I want to create a new user, I could do it by specifying the parameter. This is a quarg. This is no longer just a regular arg. The reason quargs are great is because I could swap the order, let's say either accidentally or if I want to do this on purpose. I could swap the order of these parameters. That's not going to matter because I've assigned the parameter key to it. So in this case, it's going to map favorite food by what I've passed it here. Even though I'm passing favorite food first in this list, it knows because I provide a keyword of favorite food that the value I'm giving goes to this variable or this argument of init. Right? So quargs can be generated from a dictionary very easily. There's this magic operator. I'm not sure if I could do it standalone, so let me quickly try this out. Yeah, so that's not going to work here, but basically the star operator will break your dictionary into key value pairs. So we had, a dictionary of ID and like the ID was 1. What a quarg is going to do is magically convert that to ID equals 1. Right? So that's what the star operator will do. If you have a dictionary that's this simple, it's going to break this quarg, this split operator is going to basically, the spread operator here is going to break it down into ID equals 1 as a quarg. Right? So knowing that, that's why we can use this dictionary reader object, get a dictionary object or a dictionary instance, and then we can make a user instance very easily. The way we would do that is user equals user, use that spread operator on line. And this is going to break down, again, my CSV file into name equals Encore Shah, favorite food is equal to pizza as quargs. So now that I have that, it makes it, again, very easy to create a user object. Create a user, and let's say we want to store users in the array here. And we're going to return users here. Okay, so we're creating users here. We need to append it to our users list. Okay, so again, dictionary reader just makes it that easy to create a user object. The magic, there is magic going on here, is that, let me get rid of my terminal so get more space. These names of these variables have to match what your CSV has. So notice that favorite underscore food is exactly the name of the parameter here. The reason is because this is creating quargs for us. This is creating quargs for us. And that's, again, that's breaking it down into name equals Conquer, and then favorite food equal to pizza. Okay, so if your data had changed, like if this was favorite foods, plural, or whatever you want to change it to, let's just say fav food. If I change it to this name, again, has to match this value. So in this case, I would need to change this to fav food and this to fav food, so that this quard that gets created when I had, so effectively what's going to happen is this is going to be fav food now when I'm doing star line. Is everyone with me? So again, dictionary reader just makes it that much easier to go from text data to creating an object. But the magic is the names that you give in your init method have to match the headers for your CSV file. Again, you don't have to do it. You can do it manually too. So let me quickly go back one step, just so in case you're not comfortable with dict reader, you just want to use it. I can use a regular reader file where we get an array, and then I know that name is line at index 0, and ID is. And they
in the context of the assessment, if we chose to use like reader in this way instead of dict reader, and then we were assigning them like using those manual indexes, would that be considered an error? Like it should have been done a more efficient way?
No, I would not mark off of that. As long as again you're clear about what you're doing. I would say dict reader is a little easier to understand because you're not like reading line 0 here. It's not really clear like what necessarily that is. And obviously if your CSV file were to change, like let's say we added a new column, usually you shouldn't be like, let's just say magic, and then magic is, some other value. If this happened, now your index 0 of that line is no longer ID. So it makes your code a little inflexible, but in terms of grading, no, we're not gonna be that, I'm not gonna be that particular about how you extract the data from your CSV file. So however you choose to do it for your CSV file is up to you. I guess I should have an ID here since that's in my data. Okay, so that's reading from CSV files. Is there any questions about writing CSV files? I know we're kind of pressing against the time here, so might kind of cut off our review if you guys are good with what we have. Thoughts, questions?
Solid. Thank you so much. Like that field strip helped me immensely. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and we can print out users. Again, when you're printing out stuff, always get to have an str method. So I always seem to forget it, but by practice, you should generally just create a str method. It doesn't take too much time. In this case, I can just return self.name if that's all I care about. But usually if I want to provide more data. But if I ran this, just to prove that it works. All right, hopefully there's no errors. Bring the trust. Python, Friday, fake food. Oh, because I changed my, yep, good example of why I shouldn't do that. Fake food, that's right.
So on line 17, you still have favorite.
Oh, that should be fine though.
Oh, is it?
There's that, yep. So again, you can name your internal values, whatever you want. The values you're passing in is what matters in this case. So the error is on line 3. Oh, because I was creating a manual object. My apologies. I was creating a James object here. So that is not what I want to do. Magic, because I was messing with my data. Sorry about that. Okay. Third time should be a charm.
You still need the IDs for Sarah and James on 3 and 4.
Typing too quickly. User as an attribute. What's going on here?
You put self, yeah, about to say.
Yep, sorry guys, this is where, again, probably going back to a retro, I'm kind of going too quickly and making some errors, but all right, there we go. So we get the printout from the str method, which is, in this case, just giving us a name because I'm calling print on each of the users from our read user data. Okay, writing to a file is pretty similar. If you're using dict reader, the only thing I have to keep in mind is that your dict reader will take in a header and you gotta specify what headers you have for your file. So in this case, I need to make sure I provide it ID, name, and fav fruit, and then you could write out in the same way. So the way you'd write it out for a dict reader is you could use user __ dicts, and this will create a dictionary representation of your instance data. So if I wanted to see that, let's print out u __ dict, I believe it is. I don't want to screw this
I think
up.
you need double parent or open close parents on that.
friends. I always forget, but header, typing too quickly. Yeah, I think in the dictionary is not a method in this case. It's a under attribute or something. There we go. So I get the dictionary representation for each of our users, and then you can use that to write back out to a CSV file using dict writer.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Gotcha. Yep. Good to know about. Again, using dictionary reader and writer, there is some additional overhead in terms of complexity working with it. But once you understand it, it makes it much easier to go from like objects in your code to text and vice versa. Again, you don't have to use dictionary reader. You can use the regular CSV reader, which just writes out any data that you want. You don't have to worry about working with dictionaries. That's totally fine too. If you're comfortable with just using the reader, where in the reader, you just pass it whatever text you want to output, and it will output it to each line. Okay, so that covers CSV files. I apologize. I don't think we have too much more time for any OOP specific questions, but I do want to make sure we give some time to it. Any last minute OOP uncertainties, definitely want to make sure we cover that. Not trying to rush you guys, but want to get you guys your assessments so you have enough time to work on it.
Can you repeat about the headers and the dict reader one more time?
Sure. Let's. I'm gonna quickly create an example. Just because you're gonna be doing this for the assessment, so might as well make sure we're clear on how to write out to it. So I'm gonna create a method eventually called write user data. That's gonna be a class method that doesn't return anything for me. That should be a dot. All right. So this method will be a class method that I'm gonna create here. And it's going to do basically the opposite of what my read method's doing. So class method write user data. It's going to be very similar to this. So I'm going to just copy this so I don't have to type it all out. We're not going to return anything, so the user's thing can go away. But we are need to pass in users here. Okay, so users will be some data that we need to pass it. So we'll pass users here, the ones we just got. So let's say we're going to update names. So for each user, let's just add another name in there. So let's say u.updates name was my method, I believe. Let's just say
world peace.
All right, I guess everyone will be renamed to world peace. So their favorite food remain the same, but I guess world, not word peace. Okay, so let's just say one's name is gonna be world peace, and then we want to write that back out to our output. So users is coming from our data file. We're modifying users in however capacity we want. In this case, it's a silly way. And we want to write out that data. So we pass it users. So usually the caller function should be storing the data. I know I was working with some students yesterday. They were storing their data internally, as in they had a class method that was like all users and stored their users here. Again, not wrong, this totally would work. I did have some thoughts on that in terms of your user class shouldn't be managing your data. You, as in your caller, should be the one managing the data. Your classes should just be able to like read, rewrite, and manipulate data. It shouldn't be the place where you store data. And that's just another design discussion. Don't want to get too into it. However you get it to work is more important than, having, getting too particular about design, which we do care about, but getting to work is your first objective. All right, so you pass in users, we want to write to it. So remember, when you're writing, you need to specify you're writing to it. When I read files, I didn't have this R here, but good practice, good to be explicit about what you want to do. So R means you're in read mode, so you open the file in read mode. W means you're going to write to it. If you use A, that's going to append to it. So it's going to add on to the existing data. So it just depends what you want to do. In this case, I want to overwrite everything, so I'm going to use the W. And then we need to have a header. So a header will be just a list. That's going to be ID, name, favorite food, and I think those are 3. So in this case, the dict writer, not reader, will take in a header object. And in this case, I named it the same, but I can name that header data if I want to distinguish that header data. And then don't want to print lines each time. This is going to be a write object. And these are just naming. You can name it whatever you want, but always you want to name it sort of something sensible. So for, I guess in this case, user, you and users, so that's what we're passing in. We want to write out each user to our file. So write data. So write header is one option. Write row is the main method for writing out a row. In this case, I'll pass it a dictionary. So again, since we have access to objects and the dictionary representation of it, we can just do write row. Again, we're passing it a dictionary. The dictionary looks like something down here. Again, not the best format, but these are key value pairs: ID, name, favorite food. So that is, I think someone mentioned this earlier. This is a case where I would want to make sure I have that consistent. So yes, when I create it, I can name this whatever I want. But if I'm going to write back out to it, I probably want to match the name. So in this case, whoever mentioned it, good point there. So in this case, since these values now are named the same as my header, so these values here have to match the header here. So if I did want to change the header name, I could, but I would need to match the name of whatever I have here. Like I could also, optionally, if I want to write out, where was it? If I want to write out self.email, that's not something that was contained in our initial data. If I want to write that out, I totally could. So let's actually just do that. I'm going to add new data to our output, which is the email, which is something we created internally. Let's give this a run. So again, we have dict writer, we pass it the file, and we also pass it the header, specific header information. In this case, we want to write out these fields. If I clear this and run this, let me back up my user file just in case I screwed up. Always good practice to have backups. All right, so I have user copy as my backup. Let's give this a run. Field names. Okay, my bad. This should be field names, not header. Again, hopefully you guys are updating your notes. So field names we're looking for, not header. So we're reading documentation. All right, so I ran this. I got no errors. So usually having no errors is good because I'm not printing anything out. Let's look at my output file. So that was, I copied the wrong thing. I am totally all over the place here. I meant to create a backup of my CS file. All right, so my CS file, yeah, I lost my data. That's what happens when you don't back up properly. So I'm gonna quickly create it, name, save food, and let's create one entry, pizza. And yep, so we screwed up our file. So this is where creating a backup of your initial read file is good, or maybe writing out to a separate file. So I have my backup here. Did I just lose it again? I am not having a great day here. ID, name, save food, save without an E, one for pizza. All right, save this, create an actual backup. So delete this. All right, copy this. All right, I have my backup. Now let's quickly investigate what's going on here. So write data. Let's make sure we're printing out Friday, we store users, change our name, and write users data. So that looks good. All right, yeah, not sure what's going on here. So the little piece is coming from, all right, so this dictionary is from where? Where's that dictionary coming from? Oh, the print line here. So that was coming from there. Where is world peace coming from? Print you. So it looks like users is only the name. Is that right?
I believe so.
That is something I screwed up here. U.update name. Update name takes self.name.
Isn't that from the stringed under method? So it's only showing.
I'm no longer printing out that user. So I think it's from here. So here. Okay, so it did print out something, but I didn't have my headers print out. So it did work. I'm not sure what went wrong the first time. So let me copy this back. So my stuff.csv file is going to be what I had before. All right, so it's just ID, name, fave food, and the data here. And then if I go back to here, so my header did not get printed out. So whenever you are using Dictionary Writer, make sure you call writes header. So that's going to write one entry like here, because it's usually good at have those headers. If you're appending, that is a case where you don't want to keep rewriting the headers. So just keep in mind, if your mode was append, you probably don't want to rewrite those headers each time. You just want to do it the first time. So keep that in mind, but let's give this a run. All right, so we got here, world peace. Oh yeah, sorry. You guys are totally correct. It is because of the str method why I only saw the name here. I was getting confused at that.
The header before the right data?
Pardon?
You do the right header before the right data?
Yep, yeah, so the right header is gonna print the first line. So I go to my stuff file. This is the header that gets written. So I do that before I insert all my data. So it's usually good to have the header at the top. Hence, yeah, the name header. So I got ID, name, fave food, and email. And then notice my name got changed to world peace. Still like pizza. And my email is worldpeace@codeplatoon.org. Again, this is not legit because it's email. Probably need an underscore there. We won't worry about that. So that's writing to a file. Again, pretty similar structure. Again, just for dict reader, you got to pass it field names and specify what headers you want to write out. And you could use the underscore dict attribute to get that dictionary really easily rather than having to do it manually. Okay.